Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel Front End Lover. My name is Hemant Dhanore. Today we are going to see about React.js variables, functions and the array manipulation. In this video we are going to see how many types of variable we can define in the React, how we can define the functions and how we can do a manipulation with the arrays and object. So before going to the coding part, we have some prerequisites. So prerequisites are you can go through the below videos. So below videos are included the part of React.js setup. What are the functional component? How we can create a functional component, and how we can reuse the functional component that we have created, and how we can share the data between the components. So let's start with the coding part now. So before starting the coding part, previously we have completed two videos. So in the first video we have done with the React.js setup, and in the second video we gone through the how we can create a reusable component and how we can utilize the functional component in the React app. Okay. So for those videos you will see a link in above. You can go through those links. So in the first video we gone through the public folder, src folder. Okay, now let's go to the src folder, open the app.js. Okay, when we run this, we need to run this by using npm start command. Once we run our application, it will show this default React app. Okay, now I just want to remove this default code and I want to write my own component. Okay, so let's remove this complete code from here. And one add section here. Okay, now let's create one component here. I'll create a components folder. Inside that, create one component file. Let's say I am passing header.js. Okay. Or we can create a todo.js. Okay. So in that, let's import React from React. Now create a functional component here. I have created one arrow function. Inside that, we can write a return. In the return, we can pass some fragment here. Okay. Now at the end, we need to export this here. This to do. Okay. Now I'm adding one heading tag here with the name of to do. Okay. Let's import that here. How we can import? We can import here to do by giving a complete file path, and we can initialize the component name here. Okay. Now I want to include the to do. How we can do that? We can add a one fragment here. Inside the fragment, we can call to do here. Okay. So now if we go to a browser, we will see this heading here to do. Okay. I'll modify some CSS for this one. I'll remove complete CSS. I will add one class. I will make this text align center. Okay, this main class I just want to add into the main container. Let me add one container here with the class name main. Okay, now if you see our to do is in center. Okay. Now what I want to do, I just want to define some variables. How we can define? Okay, let's define some variable here. I'll define variable let name equals to, let's say I'm putting my name Hemant here. It job I'm passing here front end developer. Okay. Now I just want to print this variable. How we can print this? We can pass here like this. We can pass name in the curly brace and we can pass job in the curly brace. Okay. So in this way we can print complete this variable that we are defining here in the our HTML, and the job that we are defining job variable we can define here. Okay. Now if you go to a browser we will see Hemant front-end developer. Okay. So how we can distribute that? Let me define a name text here. Okay. And add a job colon here. Okay. If I add a BR tag here, in this case it will show in the two line. Name is Hemant and job is front-end developer. Okay. So now why we define let here? Okay. What will happen if I define this to var? Okay. If you define this to let, okay, if I am defining any variable, let's say I am defining variable var name equals to Hemant. Okay. If I defining this var keyword with the any variable, you can define that var keyword with the variable name again. But if you are defining that variable name with the let, then you cannot define that variable with the let keyword. Okay, let's say I am again passing variable name equals to Harish. Okay, so now if we save, what we will do, what we will see, we are seeing the name here Harish. Okay, we are getting here some already name is already defined, but the name we are defined here that is showing on the browser. Okay, let's do similar for the let job equals to fresher. Okay, let's save this one. Okay, now if you see in the console, we are getting error for the let, or even in the browser, we are getting the error. Okay, if you are defining any variable name with the var keyword, and that var keyword you are repeating for the same variable name, then there will be no issue in the front end on the code. It will show some warning in the console, but it will execute. Okay, but if you are defining same for the let, then let will not allow you to define the same variable name with the let keyword. Okay. Now if I remove this let keyword and I can override the job, then you can able to override that job as well. Okay. Without, if you define any of the variable with the let, do not try to override that again with the defining again with the let keyword. If you can do this by using var, but it is not a good practice to defining the same variable name again. Even if you see here, we are getting one warning, not the error for the var keyword as well. That name is already defined. If, but if I remove this var keyword from here, then this warning will go away. Okay, now we are seeing name is Harish and job is fresher. Okay, so in this way we can define a var and let, and this is the difference in var and the let as well. And we can override the variable name as well by using this way. Okay, now how many other way are that we can define the variable? Okay, let's say I want to define some values. Let's say I am defining my salary here. Okay, salary equals to I am passing 20,000. Okay, now I just want to print this salary. Okay, this variable I can print that here. Similarly, like salary I am passing, and we can pass the salary variable here. Okay, so we will get the similar output salary equals to 20,000. Okay, but now I just want to change my salary after a years. Okay, So let's define this variable again here and try to override this. I got the appraisal, I updated my value to 25,000. Okay. Now if I try to update the salary, I'll get the warning here. Salary is a constant. Okay. And if you go to a browser, we will not see any of the output. But when you inspect your code and in the console, if you see, you will get the error that assignment of the constant variable have the type error, that we have defined a variable that is the constant, that we can define only once. We cannot override that value again and again. Okay, so where we can use this constant value, like a unique ID. Let's say I'm joining any company giving me an employee code. That employee code is unique for me for that particular company. So that we can pass in the constant. Okay, that cannot be changed. Okay, salary is going to change each and every year. So we cannot keep salary as an our constant value. Okay, so let's make it employee ID. Okay, so let's say my employee ID is this one and I just want to add my employee ID here. Employee ID colon, I can pass employee ID here. Okay, now if you go to a browser, we will see employee ID here. This error is previous error. If I refresh my page, it will not show the error here. Okay, we don't have any error right now. Employee ID, with this ID, name is Hemant, job is this. Okay, now what will happen if I am not defining any variable and I am assigning this variable here in the front end? I'm rendering that. Okay, what will happen? Let's remove job from here and see what will happen. If you are using any variable and that variable is not defined anywhere, you will get an error in the console here. That job variable that you are using here, that is not defined. Okay, in it is giving you a line number as well in the 11 line number and the which particular in the indent it have the issue, it is showing like in the 19 indent it is having this job variable that have the undefined. Okay, that we need to define. Or same in the browser also we are getting the same error. Okay, so we are getting two types of error. One is in the React app in the browser, one is in the console. That console error that we are getting, that is sometime some issues, those are the type error which are the related to JS, but these errors are not valid for the React app to run the application. Okay, now let's revert the job and let's keep that job back. Now we don't have any error and it is executing correctly. Now let's modify our structure a little bit. I'll create one list here. Okay, in the list, I am passing employee employee ID. Then we have a similar name and we have a job. I'm passing name here and the job. Okay, now these are the labels that we are showing on the browser. I want to show this a list. Okay, now let's add a class like a to do list. Okay, I'm giving a to do name. We can give a employee list or anything. The class name. Okay, you can give a hyphen or underscore here. We can pass here one container with the class name to do to follow a CSS standard proper. This is the BM standard that I'm writing, that we are defining a parent and there then we are inheriting that parent container with the list. Okay. So now let's modify the CSS bit for this one. I'm passing margin 0 and padding 0 to UL by default. Then I just want to modify the li list. So I just want to pass a list style none to all of the li, and I just want to make the padding 0. Okay. Now let's see on the browser how it will look like. We are seeing employee ID, name and job. Now I just want to show these three in the each beside the each of these. Okay, so how we can do? We can just add a display inline block here so that it will show in the same line. Now I just want to add some padding. I'm adding 10 pixel and 20 pixel from left and right. Okay, now it will look like this. Okay, let's add some width for this one. I'm passing 150 width to each of this. Okay, so now it will look like this one. Okay, now I just want to show this list again and again. How we can do that? We can repeat this UL. Okay, and I just want to add this employee ID, name and job just next to their label. Okay, what we can do here? We can just add employee ID here. We can add name here. We can add a job here. Okay. In this case, how we will see, we can see a employee ID with the employee ID, name with the name and job with the job. Okay. We have modified the UI bit. Okay. And we have updated that here. Okay. Now what I want to do, I just want to show this list only if these variables are defined. Okay. Otherwise, this should not show. This list should not show. Okay. For that, we can add here conditional operator. So let me add a condition here. If employee ID is there, then only I want to show this. Okay, so we can just wrap that into this conditional operator. We can add a ternary operator as well here, but this is the single conditional operator. If you don't have a true and false condition, you want to only check a true condition, then we can this using by and % we can do this. So now let's go and modify our employee ID. Now we are seeing the employee ID name and everything. Now let's go and just remove this employee ID from here. Now we are just defining this. Okay, let me define this undefined. Okay, now it is undefined. We don't have any value in the employee ID. Now if employee ID is not there, then we are not saying any of the values here, not even name and the object. Okay, now if you see, we are having this one. If I modify this to name, now we have a name, right? And we have an employee ID undefined. So it will show a blank qualifier here. It will not show undefined here. Now, this is the way that we can add a conditional operator here to add a condition to load the data based on condition only. If this data is available, then only it will show. Now, let's create one function. How we can create? I'll create a one arrow function here. Const. I just want to define show employee details function. Okay, so this function we can define here, and I just want to call this function on click of one button. So let's create one button here. At the top, I am creating one button. The button show employee details. And how we can call this function? We can pass the events here. So let's add a on click event here. Inside that, we can pass a curly brace here and we can directly call like this. Okay, let me add one alert here. I just added, you clicked me here, alert. Okay, so now when we go to a browser, we will see this button. When we click on this button will show this alert that click me. Okay, so now what we did, just we defined one function and we call that function here on click. So now what we can do, we can create a one flag here, const flag equals to true. Okay, and I can just pass this flag. Let me pass this to const. Instead of const, we can do this let. Now I am just passing this flag true here. Okay, I just want to make it false to hide this and at the start, and we can just modify this to true. Okay, now in the browser we are not seeing this data because the flag is true now. If I click on this, it will make this true, but it is not showing on the browser. The reason is our browser is not understanding what operation we are doing in the page. Okay, now it's updated here only, but it is not updated in the return part. So how our return will get to know that the variable that we have updated here, that should also change our return part and it render the complete this condition again. So for that we have a hooks that we can introduce in the next lecture and we can see. Okay. Now in this way we can define a web functions. We can define a functions multiple way. We can pass a parameters here. How we can pass a parameter? Let's say I am passing a scope here in the scope with the arrow function and we can pass a parameters from here. Let's say I want to pass an event of this button. I can pass a scope from here and we can get the scope here and we can access the scope in the functions from here. By using that we can get the console.log. In that we can get the event here. We are getting one error. Let's see what error we are getting. Flag is not defined. Okay, so let's go and remove this flag. We have used this flag, but flag is not defined. So now this error is gone and it executed correctly. Now let's go to browser, refresh a browser. If you click on this one, you will get the event of this click button. Okay, on click event is there and all of the attributes you required on the click event that you got in the this event. Okay, now if you want to get some current target, you want to get some target dot values inner HTML, you can get target dot inner HTML here. So in your inner HTML you have a show element employee details. So this text you can get and you can show that as well. Okay, so you can do the operation on the button, the current event that you trigger, that you can do by using this way. Okay, now let's say how we can define a object and the array and how we can access those in the page. Okay, now let's remove this completely and I can define one object here. Okay, I want to define one object with the name of, let's say, define a constant employee object here. So, okay, so in the employee object, let's define one object here. Okay, in the object, I just want to pass a name like Hemant. I want to pass salary here. I want to pass job here. Try to define a small case. I can pass the employee ID here. Okay, now how we can access this object? Okay, we have defined this object, but we have how we can access this one. If you want to access this one, we can add that here. Okay, I am adding one more here, list with the salary as well. Okay, now I just want to access this three object here. How we can do that? We can add one more li. Okay, we can get the employee dot employee ID and employee dot name. Then we can get employee dot salary. Then we can get employee dot job. Employee ID is not defined this. Okay, so let's move this to be employee dot employee ID. Let's remove this one as of now. Now we don't have button, so we don't have function defined. Now we don't have any error. Okay, so this object we have created here, and that object we access dot employee ID, employee dot name, employee dot salary, employee dot job. So in this way we get the values from this object and we print this here. In the browser, if we go, we will see employee ID here, employee name, salary, and the job. Okay, now what I want to do, why we are accessing employee every time to get the attribute name of that object. Okay, so instead of doing that, we can destruct this object here only. Okay, how we can destruct that? We can define a const here, and I can pass a employee ID here. Then I can pass a name. I can pass a salary and job. All of these keys we have defined here that we can mention here, and we can destruct those from the employee object here. Okay, and we can add a or condition with the blank object. If the now this employee we have a hard coded, if this is coming to dynamic, and if you don't know if this is having a object or not, if it is undefined, then we need to destruct this from the blank object. Then if this is undefined, then it will go to this condition and it will destruct from the blank object only. Okay, now we have destruct this employee ID, name, salary, and the job from the employee. But we have not used this because reason we have defined this all of the variables, access those all of the variable by using employee dot employee ID. Now we need to remove this. We don't require this employee for each of the value. Okay. Now if I'm running this, now we are passing this employee ID, name, salary, and job, and we are just destructing those objects here. Okay, and if you go to a browser, we will get the same output. But what we did, we destruct that object here and we shown. Now we have seen how we define our variables, how we define a constant, let, var, with the var keyword, with the let keyword, with the var, constant keyword. After that, we have seen how we can define a function, how we can call that, and in the lastly we seen how we can define an object. Now let's define one array of our object, and we can how we can access that array of the object in our React app. Okay, so now I'm removing this. Okay, and I want to define some array of object. Okay, now why we require array of object? Array of object we can define reason like if I want to define a multiple employee IDs and employee details, I want to access those data in the React app. Let's say I have a multiple employees in my company. Let's say I am having two employees detail here. One is employee ID 5441 and 5445, and here I am passing and I am just giving here in a React div. Okay, So now I just want to access these two both of the object, array of object in the R code. How we can do that? For that we can do some array manipulation. So for that we can use here, we can just pass this employee. If this employee is available, then only it can go inside this one. Now inside this we have a employee array. For destructing an array or manipulating an array, we have some methods. We can do a filter, we can do a map, we can use a for each, we can add a for loop, while loop, do while loop. We can do a iteration and we can break that array of an object and we can show that. Now here what we can do, we can use a map method here. Inside the map we can get the value, let's say employee. Okay, let's make that employee to employees variable name, because now we have a number of employees, so we can get the employees here. So let's check if employees dot length is greater than 0, then we can iterate the employees dot map, and inside that we can get the employee. Okay, and we can define an arrow function here. Okay, now inside this what we can do, we can just copy this complete code that we have written, we can just paste inside this one. Okay, now in this case how we can print this employee ID, name, salary and job. We can just copy this employee here, employee.employee ID, employee.name, then employee.salary, then employee.job. Okay, now what will be the output in the browser? We will see three rows. First row with the heading, second row with the first employee with the employee ID of ID 5445, and third row we will see with the ID 5441. Okay, let's go to browser and see. First row we have with the heading, second row we have with the ID 5445, third row we have with the ID 5441. Okay, so in this case, if we want to render a multiple object in our browser, we can in our React app we can do that. Okay, now let's go and just blank this one. Okay, I don't have any employee data now. What it will show? Is it showing a blank UL? This blank UL in the browser? No, reason because we added a condition. We are only showing a first row, this first row only. Okay. Now, if you see in the browser even in the inspect element, we are only seeing first UL with the heading. Okay. Now, if I don't have anything on the browser, why we are showing this heading part as well? How we can remove this one? We can add a condition this for the heading as well. So let me add this condition here as well, and we can pass this condition to this one as well. Okay. Now if you see, we are not showing anything on the browser. Okay. Now why we are adding this condition two times? Let's remove this one. What will happen? I will have, why this error is coming? We have to add one wrapper here and fragment here to wrap this two element in the one. Okay. If I wrap this one, then it will wrap this complete container in the one fragment, and this complete wrapper will not show when this condition is false. Okay, now if we go in the browser, so here we will get this error like employee is not defined. What the reason behind this? Let's go back to a code. Whenever we are wrapping this to any of the containers, so and we have any variable inside the any wrapper, this variable should wrap with the curly braces. Okay. Now this our complete logical code should be wrapped with the curly brace. Now you will not get this error on the browser. You will execute your correct output correctly. Okay, you don't have any object here data, so that's why it's not showing any of the values here. Okay, now let's go back and add our object back. I'm passing employee ID colon then passing name. Okay, we can copy and paste as well. I am writing this one. Then salary. Then job. Okay. Okay, now I just want to copy this object multiple times. Okay. Let me change the employee name. What we'll see in the browser, we will see two rows data, first for Hemant, second for Harish. Okay. Now, what will happen if we modify, update this again and again? So, if we want to modify, we can update the object. Let me add name here. We can update the values. Okay. If you pass, we can pass one more here. Okay. I'll pass a name. We can update the values here. Okay. If I save this one, if you go to the browser, you will see different employee IDs here with the different name, and those data we are getting replayed. Now what we are doing, we are only updating the object, but we are not modifying our code. Our code is similar for all of these 4 rows. It is only iterating the array of object that we have defined here. So in this way you can define a large number of object even, and you can iterate that. So now this object we have defined here in the hard coded. So in the actual project, what it is there, it is we are getting this object in the backend team in the response, and when we are calling any of the API in the response, we are getting one object, so that we can define in one variable, and same we can that iterate here in the front end in the same way, so that we can render our data in the our React app. So similar way we can do, but only this data come from the backend and it should be a dynamic. Now we have passing this values hard coded here, and we are loading that to front end here. So in this today's video, we have seen what type of variable we can define in React, and how we can override the variable, which type of variables can be override, and what difference in let and var we have seen. We have seen how we can define a function, how we can call a function, how we can pass a parameter in the function that we have seen. And lastly, we have seen how we can define an object, how we can render that object into the React app, and how we can create an array and the array of an object, and how we can render the array of object by using a map method onto the React app. So I hope you like this video. If you like this video, do not forget to subscribe my channel for more videos. Thank you everyone.